The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read. Your source for news, politics, sports, and all things trending. Here's your host, Marcus Gentry.
Today, in a landmark ruling that overturns decades of precedent, sweeps aside generations of arguments about racial justice and inequality, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, 6 conservatives to the 3 liberals, effectively got rid of the use of race in college admissions at all, even for the purposes of increasing diversity. In the wake of the decisions, many colleges and universities immediately sent letters to students and alumni outlining how they're going to operate going forward.
Welcome to the Daily Read, and I am your host, Marcus Gentry. Well, Clarence Thomas has done it again. He voted with the other conservative justices to kill affirmative action. Now, his whole career, his whole life as a justice and as a lawyer and as a judge was based on affirmative action. And basically what he did was he pulled the ladder up behind him. And I think this is my opinion. I think they saved him from the Anita incident debacle, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if it was true or not. It never went to a trial or anything. But I think white America, particularly the Republicans, saved him. Basically, he danced with the devil. Not saying all white people are devils or nothing like that, but basically he danced with devilish people, and he owed them. For a man who goes around thinking that affirmative action was bad for him and bad for other black people, he basically gave his life to these people. And from his background, coming from Georgia, I'm up here in Massachusetts right now. I'm about 20 miles from the Holy Cross college that he attended. There are no black people up here. I mean, it's a few scattered here and there. There's always black folks anywhere in life you go in America. But it's not like going to Atlanta. There's quite a few black people in Boston. But in these parts that I'm parked at, there's not a lot of black people up here. And from a man going from where he came from in Georgia, and Joy Reid is going to talk more about that later on in the show. But for a man coming from that background, coming to a place where there's majority whites, I have no doubt in my mind that they picked at him about affirmative action, which could have led to a lifelong resentment of affirmative action. But you can't let something like that burn you so bad to the point where you try to destroy all black people or thousands of black people. I'm going through some things right now. I had some black people try to destroy me, but I know it's a small group of them. Irrelevant people in my life. Don't matter, don't care. But they tried to destroy me on some bullshit. They even went so far as to put hidden cameras and microphones in my truck. Tap my phones. Try to take my life. But I would never dance with the devil and try to destroy other black people because of that. That's where I think he went wrong at. You see, they knew what they had when they saved him from the Anita accusations. And when they saved him, now they're getting their due. They calling in those debts. And they have to call in those debts from people like Clarence Thomas, because right now they need any kind of lifeline they can get, because Donald Trump is finna go to prison. The Republican Party is teetering on the edge of being disbanded. They're trying to do any and everything they can to do as much damage before they leave. Let's go a little further into this Clarence Thomas. I call him Mr. Bojangles.
Clarence Thomas did not always think this way. In the late 1960s, when he was at Holy Cross, he was one of just a few dozen black students at that college. As Joel Anderson writes for Slate, quote, he got admitted thanks to his good grades and a recommendation from a nun, and maybe in part because the school was actively looking for black students.
Ever since the start, he had a nun get his grades up. Affirmative action. He got accepted into Holy Cross. I haven't visited the campus yet. Like I said, I'm about 20 miles from the campus, but today's Sunday. I doubt if there's any staff members I can talk to about what are their plans moving forward. I might call up there tomorrow so I can get just the outlook on the school and what they have planned on moving forward, is how they're going to bring in minorities. Because people think affirmative action is replacing blacks with whites. In a sense it is, but it's not. These blacks that they were putting in these schools are qualified. And I think that's what a lot of people are getting wrong. These people are qualified. Clarence Thomas was qualified. Joy Reid, she said she went to she's going to talk about it later in the show, but she went to a school in Colorado that nobody would have even known her name if it wasn't for affirmative action. She was highly intelligent. They came from Harvard to get her in school. This is serious business. And now they just snatched it away from us.
It was the 1960s. It was in the wake of the Watts riots. The school had not had many black students, and it went out looking for some. And once he got to Holy Cross, well, Thomas's politics there were downright radical.
He definitely was inspired by the Black Panthers. He dressed like them. He talked like them. He had a beret, he had army fatigues, and he had the army boots.
He wore an afro. He was out there with everyone else.
Clarence Thomas started out in the black movement, and kudos to him. But like I said, they probably picked at him when he went to that majority white school. They probably picked at him so bad that he became a man who hated himself and his kind. That's sad. That's real sad, you know. And I'm not going to talk about the fact he married Jenny, which is a white woman, because love has no color. And he might love her. I don't know. It could have been an arranged marriage. I don't know. So I'm not going to talk about that. But the man has obviously got a grudge or a gripe for black people. And like I said, a lot of this, I think, came from the Anita Hill trials and tribulations that he went through. But he should never have let that lead him down a path of destroying opportunities for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of black people all across this country. This is crazy. Let's get further into this.
After completing his undergraduate degree, Thomas was accepted at a number of prestigious law schools, including Harvard, but he chose to attend Yale Law because he believed the campus's liberal politics best aligned with his own. While there, however, Thomas became disillusioned with his own status at that elite university. As the New York Times reported back in 1991, Thomas was accepted to Yale as part of the school's explicit affirmative action plan to admit more students of color. But he resented any suggestion that he received any special consideration because of his race. And once he graduated from Yale Law, Thomas blamed his initial inability to find work in the legal profession not on the fact that many legal institutions and law firms in the 1970s were still redoubts of racism and white supremacy and had racist hiring practices and did not want to hire him, but rather on the belief that his degree had been tainted by the implication of affirmative action.
See, he looked at that wrong. His mind was so crowded with people harassing him, them white people harassing him about affirmative action, that he turned against it. But what he didn't realize was he was qualified, highly intelligent. You see, it was something that none saw in him, even though Joy Reid is going to talk about him later on as far as how he couldn't speak properly when he was younger because of the area of Georgia he came from. But someone saw that he was intelligent, which is what affirmative action does. Affirmative action is not just trying to put any black person they see into a white person's seat in a college. That's not what this is about. Like Joy Reid says later on in the show, she was highly intelligent, but nobody would have even known her name if it wasn't for affirmative action, because they came out and got her. They were looking for more blacks to include in their school, but that doesn't mean the blacks that they're looking for, they're just plucking them off the streets. These people are still qualified, highly qualified, very intelligent. So he looked at that wrong, and he led down this path of putting a ladder up behind him now that he done reached the height of jurisprudence in the judicial system, becoming a Supreme Court justice. That's like the apex of being a judge. And now that he's accomplished that, he pulled the ladder up behind him so others can't go down that path. And this is going to be devastating. Let's continue on.
Any person in this room or any person in this country would like sleaze said about him or her in this fashion, or this dirt dredged up, and this gossip and these lies displayed in this manner. How would any person like it? The Supreme Court is not worth it. No job is worth it. I'm not here for that. I'm here for my name, my family, my life, and my integrity. I think something is dreadfully wrong with this country when any person in this free country would be subjected to this. This is not a closed room. There was an FBI investigation. This is not an opportunity to talk about difficult matters privately or in a closed environment. This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. And from my standpoint, as a black American, as far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves, to do for themselves, to have different ideas. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, this is what will happen to you. You will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the U.S. Senate rather than hung from a tree.
it fits right into what's going on now in my situation. It really does. See, like I said, I don't know whether he molested that woman or not. It never went to a trial. He never got found guilty or nothing. But what I can say is, there's a lot of people out here that collect dirt on you, regardless of what it is. They try to blackmail you with it. And I look at that whole situation with Clarence Thomas. When I look back on that video of him testifying before the Senate committee, I saw the hatred and the anger in that man, and it bubbled over. And there was two things going on, two blackmails going on. The people that was trying to destroy him through Anita Hill, and then you had the other people that saw an opportunity and saved him from it. And now that they done saved him from that, they calling in their favor. This is what you call stacking the court. You know, the other guy that just became a chief justice, they say he molested a woman at a frat party, but they gave him the court seat anyway. And when he get a little older, they're gonna pull up on him. They're gonna pull up on him, and they're gonna ask for that favor. And that's what I think Clarence Thomas is going through. I'm gonna stop calling him Mr. Bojangles, because, like I said, he is qualified. He's a very intelligent man, and I'm gonna give him the respect he's due. But I can see that whole ordeal with the Anita Hill incident, it was some things going on behind the scenes that forced him to either lose everything, his career, or play ball with these people. And he decided to play ball. And now, years later, they called in that favor. That's sad. Let's continue on.
He had his Yale law degree, and he had a 10-cent stamp stuck to it. You know, like a 10-cent price tag stuck to it. Because he's like, yeah, this is what it's worth, right? 10 cents, right? No more.
He came to blame affirmative action for the rejection he felt.
Now I knew what a law degree from Yale was worth when it bore the taint of racial preference. I was humiliated and desperate.
Listen to what he just said. He was humiliated because of the Anita Hill thing, and he was desperate. Trust me when I tell you, they put that man on the court for a reason. He owed them. Let's continue on.
Eventually, Thomas found a job in the office of the conservative Missouri Attorney General John Danforth, who recently told the Slow Burn podcast that he hired Thomas in part because of his race.
My ambition was that the AG's office was to be the best law office in the state. Now, did I also think that it was important to have a diverse office? Yes, I did. And did I think that it would be wonderful to hire Clarence Thomas for that reason? Yes. But the most important reason was I had to get the job done.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
Thomas was in a bind. He wanted to keep rising in the administration, but he didn't want to rise this way.
He didn't want anyone to think that he had gotten a job because he was black. Of course, every job he had ever gotten was because he was black.
That was Clarence Thomas's ex-girlfriend before he got married. And, you know, as I said before, he owes all of his accomplishments to affirmative action. And then he turns around and snatches the ladder up behind him after he done made the highest court in the land and he's old now. You see, revenge is a dish served cold sometimes. And there's a thin line between revenge and justice. I think Clarence Thomas was in a situation where he done rose as high as he was gonna go if that Anita Hill thing would have brought him down. But through the actions of others that saved him from it, you know, with a wink wink and a nod nod, he was able to rise higher and become a Supreme Court justice. But he knew that he owed these people. That's the reason I like doing this show, because it gives an outlook on our society, and I can bring it to other people, because once I put this show out there, it's out there forever. And even when I die, somebody eventually will run across one of these videos and they'll get an understanding in the change in times and the things that was going on in my generation. This is some devastating stuff. There has been devastating things that have happened in America every 10, 20 years. Everything from the Civil War, the Trail of Tears, the Great Depression, World War I, World War II, civil rights. Every 20 or 30 years, there's a great upheaval. Barack Obama was a great upheaval, even though it was for the better, because we finally got a minority as a president. Donald Trump, a great upheaval in our society. Every 10, 20, 30 years, there's a great upheaval in our society that's like markers. It marks the change in times. And this right here is something that will go down in history, because California stopped using affirmative action 20 years ago. And they have the study on it. There has been a great drop in minorities entering into schools. You know, high school, yeah, you know, but as far as going further than that, it's been a drastic drop. And part because when you go back, I'm going to talk about this later on in the show after we get to Joy Reid. Joy Reid's speech is going to be very important. But when you look at all the things that they look at to get you in college, most minorities don't have it. When they look at your structure, your home structure, when they look at your accomplishments before you came to college, when they look at your test scores is going to rise or fall because of your surroundings. And a lot of minorities are behind whites. So our surroundings is not that great. Your surroundings play a big part in your studying and your academics. Let's get a little further into this.
From there, Thomas' star continued to rise in conservative legal circles, a rise that, according to his ex-girlfriend, was again predicated in part on affirmative action.
In 1982, the White House offered Thomas a big promotion, the chance to run his own federal agency. The trouble was, that agency was the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This was exactly the kind of role Clarence Thomas didn't want, a position focused on race and discrimination.
He didn't want to be there. He was resentful that he had not been offered something that a white person would want.
Like I said, he looked at that wrong. The reason why he looked at that wrong is because if you got in college through affirmative action and you're highly intelligent and they gave him that job to look out for other blacks, he should have took it. That was his opportunity to give back, but he didn't want that. And then he got caught up in that whole Anita. Like I said, I see the patterns. I see the patterns. And the pattern I'm seeing is the nun down in Georgia saw he was highly intelligent, and through affirmative action she helped him. She got him into Holy Cross, which is affirmative action. He was intelligent enough to stay there, because colleges will kick you out. Don't get it twisted, people. Just because you get in through affirmative action don't mean they won't kick you out if your grades is not good. So he gets in through affirmative action. He gets hired in Missouri through affirmative action. Then they offered him a job to go back and help other minorities. He didn't want that. Okay? The Anita Hill thing kicked off. Now, listen carefully to what I'm saying. Listen to the pattern. I see patterns all over the place. Anita Hill was a minority. She was black. I don't know how it happened. I don't know if it happened or didn't happen. But there was a push to destroy him. He turned down an opportunity to work with other minorities and help pull them up through a government program that they started, and they needed him to run it. He didn't want that. He wanted a job white people want. Anita Hill incident kicked off. Somebody tried to destroy him. The whites in the Republican Party, the Bush people, saved him. Okay? But it came with a price. It came with a price tag. I'm hoping y'all seeing the patterns. Let's go a little further on into this.
But that mistaken belief that race-based consideration, diversity-based consideration, and some elusive concept of true merit abstracted from that are mutually exclusive is the foundational lie on which today's Supreme Court decision was built. It was that belief, however, that helped secure Thomas's legal legacy. Thomas was eventually appointed to the D.C. Court of Appeals by President George H.W. Bush, and just 2 years later, Bush nominated him to the Supreme Court to replace the retiring Justice Thurgood Marshall, at that point the only black person to ever sit on the nation's highest court.
The president called Thomas the best qualified person for the job and denied that he selected Thomas to replace the retiring Thurgood Marshall because he's black.
And the fact he's minority, so much the better. But that is not the factor, and I would strongly resent any charge that might be forthcoming on quotas when it relates to appointing the best man to the court.
That's bullshit. His whole life was dedicated, or all of his accomplishments came through affirmative action. And you know, I don't look at it like, I look at it as an opportunity that he wouldn't have normally had. Regardless of whether they gave it to him because he was black, he still was black and qualified. He was black and qualified. He looked at that wrong. Listen to what Joy Reid had to say about him, because she owes her career to affirmative action.
The readout right here on MSNBC, a graduate of Harvard University, the defendant in today's ruling, and she joins me now. Roy, first, Joy, let me first just get your reaction to the ruling, which I think we all suspected was coming. But given that it is your alma mater, I know you've been watching it closely.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to what happened today?
And I will say I'm also very, very proud of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who I was privileged to know at Harvard University, one of the most brilliant human beings I've ever met and had a chance to know. And her dissent, I thought, was scathing and perfect.
What she said about that whole Clarence Thomas helping destroy affirmative action, it was breathtaking. And she basically said, just because the court says that affirmative action is racist against white people, that doesn't mean it's true. Because there is racism keeping blacks from getting into places that they're supposed to be in because they're highly intelligent.
So, I was not surprised, because Clarence Thomas has been on a mission to dismantle every institutional attempt to help and aid not just black people, but any people who have been disadvantaged in this society since he's gotten on the court. He, like Samuel Alito, appears to operate from a kind of rage, a sort of cold rage against the entire 20th century, the second half of the 20th century, which they find to be an affront to their own self-image and to their image of America as this country that is noble and that has always been noble, and whose slave-holding founders were noble and really hated slavery and were just so pained at the fact that they had to own all these people and that their wealth was derived from owning these people.
Joy Reid is right. But she's wrong about the reasoning behind Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas was put in the bind. And like I said, I see the patterns. Because like I said, I'm in a situation, something similar. Because he had blacks trying to destroy him through the whole Anita Hill incident, and whites came out and saved him. And see, somebody mentioned that to me as far as this organization is trying to harm me. Some guy said, why don't you get the white members of this organization to help you? I almost laughed when that person said that. I almost laughed. And like I said, this is real life stuff. This is the type of stuff that you can't make this up. Because this organization has, all of us are really supposed to be the same, but you do have black part of this organization, then you got the white counterparts. And I can see the parallels. But the thing about it is, he let the stuff he went through lead him to destroying the opportunities for other minorities. I could never let that happen, ever. I know who want to get at me. This is crazy.
But really, they were good-hearted, and that's kind of what his concurrence discusses. But what I find fascinating is what you put forward, and I'm going to now have to watch that whole front line that you just showed a piece of. Because let's just be clear. Clarence Thomas was born in Pinpoint, Georgia. He is of the Gullah extraction. Yep. He didn't even speak English until he was 7 years old. He spoke the Geechee tongue and was so afraid to speak in front of white people because he was always told, don't speak Geechee in front of white people because it would embarrass you, that he almost never spoke at all. Mm-hmm. There was a nun, a white nun, whose largesse helped get him through school and get him those good grades. He has been assisted by white patrons, really his whole life, even now by very rich ones, as they fly him around the country. And to your very point, he seems to deeply resent all of the assistance he got, and he wants to make sure that nobody like him ever gets that kind of help again, because it helps his self-image so that he can lie to himself and fool himself and maybe hate himself a little less for having gotten help all along his path to the Supreme Court. And let's be clear, the most important thing to know about his confirmation, other than the fact that he's accused credibly of sexual misconduct, is the polling that got him over the line. And it was the polling that I very much remember. I was one of the few black folk who was against him. It was the polling that showed that about 7 in 10 black people supported his ascension to the seat once held by the great Thurgood Marshall, and he is not his equal. It was black people's support that got wavering members of that Judiciary Committee
Democrats,
and wavering senators.
They needed Democratic votes. There was a Democratic majority. That's why Joe Biden is in those hearings running. They needed the Democratic votes.
And it was only black people's support in those polls that got wavering Democrats to vote for him. And he has repaid black people with scorn ever since.
And that's what you should never do. When you know, he knows who sent Anita Hill. He knows. You see, when you're in a situation like that, he should never have danced with the devil. If you hate the fact that all of your accomplishments came through affirmative action, then you shouldn't have took the job. I don't get it. But what I do see is, like I said, the pattern. And the pattern is, he danced with the devil. They saved him. And now the devil came for his soul. He signed that contract. And that's what's going on. Let's continue on with this.
Joel Anderson, who's the fantastic host, and the academic Leah Wright Rigueur, who wrote a great book about black conservatives, they're talking about their own experience in elite white-dominated institutions, right? Of that kind of, that feeling that suspicion, okay, from white folks. Oh, you're an affirmative action case. Now, in Thomas's case, it's a defining anger of his life. Mm-hmm. But it's also real. And I feel a little weird as a white person being like, I don't want to say that what Thomas experienced was in any way not legitimate. I think he comes by it honestly. But I'm curious how you think about it, and you think about that sort of coded racism that comes in those institutions and circumstances, and what it means for the broader question of whether we should have it constitutionally.
Well, let me just be clear. I got into Harvard only because of affirmative action. I went to a school no one had ever heard of in Denver, Colorado, in a small suburb. I didn't go to Exeter or Andover. I didn't have college test prep. I just happened to be really nerdy and smart and have really good grades and good SAT scores. Right. But someone came to Denver, Colorado to look for me. A Harvard recruiter flew to Denver, and I met up with her at the Village Inn restaurant and did a pre-interview to pull me into Harvard. I was pulled in, and the schools like Harvard and Yale that I got into affirmatively. Yes. And it was literally not saying we're going to take an unqualified person and put them in Harvard. Yes. We're going to take a very qualified person who we would never know existed and put them in Harvard. That's how I got there. That's how Ketanji got there. That's how Justice Jackson, I should say. Justice Jackson got there. It's how Clarence Thomas got there. Right. But the minute I arrived from my majority black little town, Montbello in Denver, to Harvard, the first week or two that I was in class, my presence was questioned by white people. I was in this big conference class where some white students stood up and said, those students, the black students, they're only here because of affirmative action. It became a huge argument that we all ended up having. This was freshman year. I had never had my academic credentials questioned. I had never had anyone question whether I was intelligent until I got to Harvard. And it was a defining point of my experience there. It's why I really was one of the many reasons I was miserable there my freshman year.
Yeah.
You feel completely out of place, and people keep telling you shouldn't be here. And yet, some of the people I went to school with were far less smart than me or the other black folk there. They got in because their daddy and their granddaddy. I went to school with somebody whose name was on one of the buildings.
I think she's talking about Bush. I think she's talking about Bush Jr. See, what she said is very important. And this is for the whites who might run across this show sometime in the future. Affirmative action was necessary because you never gave, the whites in this country never gave us compensation for slavery. So the least they could have done was get the people in our communities that's qualified and put them in places that they can flourish, instead of leaving them to their own devices inside the hood of America. And that's why affirmative action is very important for those whites, Japanese, Chinese, all other races who feel like minorities are getting pushed. That's not true. These people who are being placed at Harvard and Yale are qualified. They're not just going out getting any random blacks off the streets. Like Joy said, she was qualified, and they came and got her from a little place in Colorado that nobody even heard of. And without affirmative action, you're going to start seeing a lot of minorities who are qualified getting denied now. It's sad.
You're going to school with people whose names are on the buildings, who are third and fourth generation legacies, whose parents pumped money into Harvard to get them in. But that affirmative action is okay with this majority. They said that the people who benefited from slavery, their descendants, who are so far ahead of black folk in terms of opportunity that we'll never catch up to them. I don't care how many Oprahs we get. Those people's affirmative action is A-okay, because those people can pay for fancy trips for them. But you people who want to get in just because of your brains, but you're not from a legacy, too bad. You can't come in.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
For more than 50 years, colleges have taken different approaches towards admissions to make their campuses more diverse. Considering an applicant's race, generally called affirmative action, has long been standard at universities from UPenn to Harvard, but not anymore. The Supreme Court has ruled that no college in the U.S. can consider an applicant's race in admissions.
On paper, that sounds good. It sounds fair and all of that, right? But it's not. Because if you see that wheel, I'm going to put that wheel up. If you see that wheel right there, that wheel, if you take out race, minorities don't stand a chance to get into college, even though they're highly intelligent. Extracurricular activities, essays. How many minorities in high school are just putting out big major essays? Awards. The only awards I see a lot of minorities getting are trophies from football and basketball and all of that. Life experiences. These are all the things, leadership, recommendations. Who's going to recommend Big Joe, who's highly intelligent, but, you know, we're not going to send him to Yale. I got a white kid up the street, we'll send him. You know, if you take out the race factor and you look at this wheel, minorities are going to fall behind going to college. This is facts.
9 states have already banned this practice. California did almost 25 years ago. Just enough time for a detailed study on its consequences.
Once you have the data set in hand, there's an awful lot you can learn, honestly, pretty quickly, right? Basically what I'm doing is just differences in means. What happened to the kids after 98? What happened to the kids before 98? Just those comparisons tell you an awful lot about not just what happened in California, but I think what we can expect to happen across the country.
Now, what happened in California, when California passed that bill to stop allowing race to play a part in going to college, there was a drastic drop in minorities going to school there. Drastically. And now that they've made this nationwide, it's going to be even worse. It's going to be even worse, people. And that doesn't mean that these people aren't qualified. It just means that now they're not even going to look for you.
Here's how affirmative action changed college admissions and what the future of higher education might look like without it. Before affirmative action, selecting which of these student applicants would be accepted was fairly simple. Most colleges would essentially filter students. They'd set factors like a minimum GPA or a minimum test score, and voila, there's your pool of accepted students. Obviously, the more selective the school, the higher those standards were. But
a big part of both test scores and grades are pre-18 educational investment and, honestly, non-educational investment. The degree to which you had a stable household, the degree to which you had some notion of being able to focus on your work. The better a high school you go to, the better the test score you get. The better sort of access to resources outside of high school, like tutoring or other services, that you had access to before 18, the better you test.
Everything that man just said, minorities is lacking in that. Lacking in the resources, lacking in the tutoring after school. We lacking in these things. Everything this man said. So when you take out the race factor in getting minorities in school, and you got to rely on all of this other stuff only, it's finna be a problem.
It's clear if you break down SAT scores by the background of the student. Students from higher income households score higher. Same if you look at who grew up in a household with a parent with a graduate degree versus no degree. That also reflects in race, with Black and Hispanic students scoring lower than white and Asian students. So in the 1970s, when UC Berkeley's admissions really just looked at GPA and test scores, the student population was less than 5% Black and Hispanic.
Let's get this right. Okay. We got 73% single parent households in the Black community. It's around 73%. Economics. We're behind in economics when it comes to whites and blacks. All of this stuff plays a factor in your learning as a child. So when you have all of these factors suppressing you as a minority, you got all of these factors suppressing you, and then you still is able to become an intelligent person and get good grades. What they just did was take the opportunity from those people. You see, at first, we already know we lacking in a lot of things in our communities to get us to a level of intelligence that we need to be at. But the ones that manage to succeed regardless of that, I'm talking about the best of the best in intelligent wise, they at least had a vehicle to get them in those places, which was affirmative action. Because like I said, they're not just plucking anybody off the streets. These people are qualified. So now, somebody like Clarence Thomas, who already had a gripe and self-hatred for him and his people, he done pulled a ladder up behind him.
So in the 80s, they began considering race in their admissions decisions. It worked. By the 90s, they would chart students on a social diversity index. If you were low income and a minority and had moderate grades and test scores, you were in. If you were high income and white, you needed higher scores to get in. Some colleges, like the UC Davis School of Medicine, used quotas, utilizing a similar filtering system, but a few spots would be reserved for minority applicants.
They left those spots open because, like I said, they never gave us reparations. We didn't get that. So the least they could have done was reserve those spots in higher learning, jobs, and things of that nature for the minorities who are the best of us. Now they've taken that away.
In the late 70s, a white student named Backy fell here. Not good enough to get in among other white applicants, but with higher test scores and GPA than the minority students who got in. He sued, claiming discrimination. It made it to the Supreme Court, he won, and was admitted.
Good for him. And I know some people are going to disagree with me saying that, but it's good for him. I'm glad he sued and got admitted. That's what he's supposed to do. But that doesn't mean they should stop going out and getting minorities and putting them in places that they're qualified to be in.
Instead of just filtering a pool of applicants, most colleges look at each person individually. Like Harvard will look at SAT and GPA, but also things like extracurricular activities, essays, awards, life experiences, recommendations, leadership, and yes, race. But this is exactly what the Supreme Court has now struck down. In two separate cases against Harvard and the University of North Carolina, plaintiffs argued this holistic approach was just a cover for discrimination against white and Asian students. The Supreme Court agreed, ruling that eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. The student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race. Many universities have for too long done just the opposite, which means in this holistic review, race can no longer be considered.
To the degree that these universities want to maintain their current level of racial diversity, California has shown that that is infeasible, at least given the policies that California has tried to implement.
Basically, we finna take a big hit, people. And I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone the other day. We was talking about how you're gonna have some minorities who think this is a good thing, so now we can get our own. Get our own what? I mean, get our own what? I've seen so many people try to go back to segregation, separation. It's hard for me to understand that, how we fought so hard to be integrated, and now you got a certain cabal of minorities who want to go back to being segregated or separated. And I think that's a bad thing. And I can do a whole show on why. I think I will. I'm not going to get all the way into it right now. This is at the end of this show. But I will touch on it just a little bit with the little time I have left. Separating and segregating is a bad thing because we don't have the resources. We have many people who have tried that. But it takes resources to start up a university. So where you gonna get the resources from? And then who are the kids who are gonna be put into that university? The sons and daughters of black millionaires and billionaires? You're accusing white people of doing that right now. So now you minorities are gonna do it. Think about what I'm saying. Like I said, I could do a whole show on this. I was talking to somebody about, I heard a Farrakhan speech, and he was saying that America should give us 5 states, and that all the blacks in America move to those 5 states. I wouldn't go. And the reason I wouldn't go, for number one, it's going to be lawless. You're going to have the have and the have-nots. You're going to have gangs, because people are going to bring their kids. They're going to be trying to carve out an area for their particular gang. You're going to have Christians and Muslims. Some of the Christians are going to want this to be a Christian black state. Some of the Muslims are going to be like, nah, this is a Muslim, Islamic black state. Christianity is what the white man gave us. It's going to be total chaos. And then you're going to have people who are not going to farm. So now we got to get our food and produce from the white people across the border. They're going to jack the prices up. Their people are going to eat cheaper. Then you're going to have wealthy blacks who are going to have condos on the other side of the border with the white people. But the poor blacks, we can't go over there. We can't go across that border. It's going to be crazy. Like I said, I could do a whole show on the reason why we shouldn't segregate ourselves from white people and Japanese people and Chinese people in this country. Because as long as we're integrated into this country, they have to deal with us. But if we separate ourselves on small little parcels of land, they can squeeze us out. I hope you guys learned something from today. This is the Daily Read, and I'm out.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
Business.